Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in November, which is a pretty short list. I read a few things for a currently reading vlog where I was trying to clear out books off of my currently reading list. The first thing I finished was In the Shadow of the Ship by Aliette de Bodard, which I'm holding in a very weird way, please bear with me. This is a gothic horror sci-fi novella actually, set in Herzliya universe, which is essentially a version of the far future that's based in Vietnamese culture. I love this series. It is so fun, but this was not my favorite book in the series. I think I gave it 3 or 3.5 stars. I think this suffers from being a little bit too short because I just felt like I was missing a lot of context in the first part of the story, where I didn't quite understand some of the relationships that we were being shown for the main character Huyen, and some of the reasons that she was frightened to go back to the ship. This is following her as she is going back to the ship where she grew up, that has something called tribute, where small children go missing, and she fled the ship when some of her friends had gone missing and is now returning many years later for a funeral. So I didn't quite feel like I had a total grasp on the complexity of the relationships on the ship, and the ship itself, I think because we only see it at this one point in time, feels very absent from the story despite being a very big presence in the lives of the characters, so I wanted a little bit more of that. And then I think also because it was so short, there's a romance that just feels a little bit underdeveloped. I wanted more time between those characters of them getting to know each other and developing their relationship, so it just felt a little bit too short overall. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. I can't remember if I already said that, but I still had a good time with it. It just was a little bit underdeveloped for me. Then after that, I finished The Decagon House Murders. I think this was on the same day. I ended up staying up really late to finish this one. And you might say, oh, that means it's really good, right? No, I gave it 2 stars. I just wanted to know what happened because I'd been reading it and I wasn't really enjoying the writing, but I was curious about the puzzle that had set up. And ultimately, it was disappointing. I didn't like the characters here. I think they were really flat. There were 2 people that had big personalities that were easier to keep track of who was speaking, but everybody else felt kind of the same to me, and I felt like particularly the female characters were really underdeveloped and felt very stereotypical, so I didn't enjoy that. I did like that there were 2 sets of investigators. There were people on an island and people on a mainland. People on the island are having a basically and then there were none kind of situation, and the people on the mainland are looking into a historical, not even really a historical, a cold case associated with the island that happened 6 months beforehand that may be connected to some of the events happening on the island in the modern moment. So I'm saying it as if it's historical. It feels historical the way they're talking about it, and then it keeps reminding you it was only 6 months ago. So it's a little bit weird timeline-wise. I liked the dual investigations and the ways that those kind of intersected. I also felt like the mainland investigators were doing a much better job actually investigating. The people on the island were doing this very silly thing of a thing would happen and then they'd go talk about it, and then they would wait for another thing to happen and then they would go talk about it. And it just didn't feel like they were really looking into anything at all. So I was kind of disappointed with that overall. And then in the end, the answer was so convoluted it required 30 pages of explanation, which was frustrating. So yeah, overall didn't have a great time with this one and don't really recommend it, but if you like And Then There Were None retellings, it might be worth giving a shot from that perspective if you're really into And Then There Were None. After that, I read The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is a very weird thriller set at a writing retreat that gets snowed in at the home of an eccentric horror writer. And this was very weird because I think the pacing is odd, but it really leans into the weirdness. So the first half of this book is very much about people being weird at each other for a while. Our main character is, I think her name is Alex. Yes, so our main character is Alex, and she has a history with one of the other people at the writing retreat, so there's the tension from that relationship happening, and then there's also these other people who all have kind of their own motivations for being at the writing retreat, and about half of this is just 5 people plus the author being kind of weird at each other, and I would say that the mystery element really kicks in the second half, right about halfway through the book, and then it escalates very, very quickly from there. It's much more gothic feeling in the first half and thriller feeling in this last half. That said, it really leaned into the weirdness of its structure and the weirdness of its plot, and it really committed to that, but also it didn't feel like it was taking itself too seriously. So overall, I really enjoyed it because it feels like it was just a fun time, and I liked some of its commentary on the way the characters were dealing with the traumatic situation that was happening to them, because we do get a nice little epilogue that's like, here's where they're at 6 months down the road and how they're healing from what's happened to them. So I did like the commentary I had on that, and there was a lot of discussion here on like original ideas and, you know, whether you can create more than one good story, which I thought was an interesting conversation. And overall, I just had a really good time with this one. It was silly, it was over the top, it was weird, and I just had a great time. So I think I gave it 4 stars, if I remember correctly. And then finally, I read a different translated locked room murder mystery kind of thing, and this was The No Mask Murder by Akamitsu Takagi. This one is from the 1950s, and it's set kind of just after World War II, and it was really interesting. I think I gave this one 3.5 to 4 stars. I want to say it was 3.5, but I feel like I had a lot more fun with this one than I did with the Decagon House Murders. This one is following this guy who originally was a chemist, and then he went away to fight in World War II, and now he's come back and is living with this family where one of the family members previously had been a professor of his, but that man died several years ago, and now he's living with the remaining family who remember him from when he was in college. And during this time there, weird things start happening, and the patriarch of the family begins to be convinced that something horrible is about to happen, and ends up asking the main character to call in his friend Akamitsu Takagi, the author, to investigate, because Takagi really wants to try being a detective and write a unique detective story that's a first-person narrative of how he solved a mystery. So that's kind of the setup for this. It's got this twofold structure where it's both the framing device of the author wanting a first-person narrative, and then the kind of detective story, because you do get that first person narrative, but it's not from Takagi's perspective. He is a character in the story, but we get his friend's perspective instead. And I really liked the way that this structure played with a classic detective story. This is clearly inspired by like Golden Age crime, but it's doing something a little bit different with its detective and its structure. I really liked that our main character in here, whose name is escaping me, Koichi, I think is his name. I really liked the way that he was not kind of a classic Sherlock Holmes or Poirot kind of character. He's very emotionally invested in what's happening, and he's very close with the family, but also has a lot of resentment for various members of the family for their cruelty, because the family's not very nice. And I just really enjoyed seeing that dynamic and the ways that Koichi's familiarity with the family allowed him to investigate really cleverly and put those pieces together, because he knew all of these other things from like years ago when he was being taught by this professor who has since passed away. And I just really enjoyed that dynamic in there. I also like that we get this bit about Takagi in the beginning where there's like a foreword as though, you know, this is a thing that's actually happened, and he says that it doesn't always portray him in a positive light, but he feels it's important for the real story of the mystery to be known. And so we have Takagi kind of getting dragged at various points in a really funny way. There's also a Mr. Ishikari, who is a prosecutor who's like a family friend of Koichi's. And so there's all of these people who have like various levels of and kinds of investment in the mystery, trying to solve it. And it's just really fun. It's just a great version of like eccentric personalities trapped in one space. There's a locked room mystery. There's this kind of like tragic overtone to it. And I just had an absolutely great time with this. I will say it does have some very 1950s sentiments about some things in here, so just be aware of that going in, particularly as it surrounds mental health and STDs and women's roles in a family. So those are kind of the big pieces that I would say feel very like 1950s to me. Like you can tell that this was written in the 50s. I also felt like one of the puzzles was just a little bit too complex. It was a little bit silly, and it was an odd solution where everything else felt much neater. But overall, again, had a great time. It does some interesting stuff also with Japanese theater and English theater and English literature more broadly. So it was just really fun the way it was like pulling all of these different pieces together. There's some interesting conversations on like philosophy and law and justice and power. And it was just a good time with some really thoughtful conversations that just totally pulled me in. I actually really want to read the author's other book. It says he's also the author of The Tattoo Murder, so I feel like I need to check that one out as well because this was just fun. So those are all of the books that I finished in November. I'm hoping that December is going to be a little bit better quantity-wise because I'm participating in Reindeer Readathon, so I want to be getting those points for my team. I'm on Team Snowflake this year. Very exciting. And yeah, I'm hoping I'll carry over some of the positive trend in my reading into December because I feel like I had a weaker start to the month and then it kind of went upwards from there. So overall, it was a good time. I think I say that a lot, don't I? Overall, it was a good time. Oh well, that's just gonna be my catchphrase now, at least until I find a new one. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite book was that you read in November, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.